Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to another edition. I want to cover something that initially is probably not going to excite most of you. Just the title, which is Modern Monetary Theory. All right, what has that got to do with financial therapy? I will explain, because understanding this can really help reduce anxiety with a lot of those financial parts of you that may be given to worry and concern, especially when it's in the context going on in so many nations. So let me explain. And I got the idea of doing this when over Christmas, my son Davin, who's aged 21 and in his junior year to become a mechanical engineer, asked me, so Dad, what do you think about modern monetary theory now? I'll assure you that modern monetary theory is not discussed by most 21-year-old mechanical engineers. But my son, having been raised by a father who's interested in these things and has discussed various things having to do with money and its creation and how it's used, has been exposed to what this is. And the reason he was asking me, so what do you think about modern monetary theory now, is that MMT, which it's the short version of, has come under a lot of criticism recently, given the huge spending bills of 2020 and 2021. More recently, the spending bills toward the end of 2020 and in 2021, which were the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was about $1 trillion, and the American Rescue Plan of 21, which is almost $2 trillion. And while there isn't a solid agreement amongst economists or politicians that lay the primary responsibility of our 40-year high inflation rates at the feet of these gigantic spending bills, there's many that believe they were great contributors to it. Other contributing factors to our inflation that most can agree on are supply chain issues, raw material shortages, and low unemployment. Okay, so what is it about this MMT, and why is it under fire as the primary cause of high inflation rates? Many people, a lot of my friends included, incorrectly interpret modern monetary theory as favoring the printing of currency with abandon by a government. They often go away from or get the idea that modern monetary theory doesn't believe that deficits matter. You just create money and spend. Now, this is not a viewpoint that's held by MMT. And almost always when somebody is being critical of MMT to me, we talked about confirmation bias before, and that's where we look to everything that would support what our beliefs are and kind of ignore stuff that is contradictory to our beliefs, often because there's vulnerable parts of us that fear being wrong and take on a lot of shame and difficult feelings with the thought of being wrong. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So it's very hard for them to hear that modern monetary theory does not support creating and printing money with abandon. So let me explain to you the principles of MMT, and if you can understand these, it can help reduce your anxiety. I know with a lot of my financial planning clients that once they've understood these principles, it's really helped them reduce their anxiety. So modern monetary theory is pretty simple. It would suggest that no sovereign government, now a sovereign government would be like the US, China, and UK, that print their own money. So all of those countries print their own money. I know we have listeners in South Africa. South Africa prints their own money. In Australia prints their own money. In India prints their own money. The UK prints their own money. One of the few places that doesn't print their own money is Europe, because Europe is on the euro. So those countries in Europe that use the euro are similar to states in the US. They cannot go out and print money. The state of South Dakota cannot go out and print money. But a sovereign government can. And if a country can print their own money, they cannot go bankrupt. Period. Now, I know this is confusing to some of you. How can this be? Well, just think about it. And this is very contrary to what you read in the media, that you hear from politicians who are very frequently saying we're kicking the can down the road and at some point in time we'll go bankrupt. No. If you own a printing press, if you can create money, you're not going to go bankrupt. You're going to be able to print to create all the money you ever need to meet any debt that's denominated by that currency. So the U.S. Treasury will never run out of dollars. It's impossible. If goods and services or obligations are priced in U.S. dollars, the supply of dollars to our government to buy those goods, those services, is unlimited. The U.S. government can never not be able to afford the interest on their debt. Why? They can create all the dollars they need to pay the interest on the debt. Okay, now that's a lot. But if you just think about that, it makes sense, right? If you're the state of South Dakota, you can't print money, you can go bankrupt. If you are Exxon or Ford, you can't print money, you can go bankrupt. You and I can go bankrupt, right? Because, we could try to print money, but it's illegal for us to print money. It is legal for the federal government and no one else. So that's the federal government of any sovereign nation. The UK, Japan, China, South Africa, Australia, any country that issues their own currency cannot go bankrupt. Okay, I think you're probably saying, all right, I get that, okay. But something seems terribly wrong here. It doesn't seem right that a nation could just print money and not have negative consequences. How could this be? Well, that is very true, okay? A country just can't churn out its own currency without any regard. Why? And this is what the opponents of MMT largely don't get and can't hear. The major constraint on currency issues, on those countries that can print money and create money, is inflation. So it behooves any sovereign government to manage the money supply so that they avoid impoverishing their citizens through high inflation, because high inflation devalues the currency. And this is one of my pet peeves of all politicians, the media. When they talk about inflation, they don't talk about inflation when they are reporting dollar numbers. We were having this discussion over the holidays with my family. My father said he once was paid 20 cents an hour to work back in the 40s. My mother worked for 35 cents an hour in 1950. Well, when we carried those forward for inflation, they were being paid the equivalent of $3 or $4 an hour, which it wasn't great in today's economy, but that's what they were being paid back then. I don't know, there may not have been minimum wage back then. I was paid $1.65 at McDonald's in, I think it was around 1970. And when I took a look at what the inflation adjusted amount was for that, I think it was just about $12 an hour. So $1 million, I'm trying to remember, I think this was in 1950. $1 million in 1950 is the equivalent of $10 million today. So our brains lock onto dollars and resist converting those dollars and adjusting those dollars for inflation. And this is so important. It's so important. When you hear that a new film is the highest grossing film in history, well, of course there are always going to be new higher grossing films because of inflation. The question is, 10 years ago, what a film grossed, you've got to add an inflation factor to that film and bring it forward to today to determine what film really was the top grossing film, right? So I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, back to MMT. So the downfall of creating money is inflation. It's not the deficit, because the government can always print enough money in its currency to pay its bills. Now, if debt is coming due in something other than its currency, this can be a problem. You take a lot of your South American countries that borrow in dollars. Well, you can't pay a dollar-denominated debt if you're Venezuela, with Venezuelan pesos. You've got to purchase dollars. So I just wanted to undermine, as long as that debt is denominated in the currency of the country, they can print as much money as they need. The key, the threat, is inflation. So MMT would hold when the economy is strong and unemployment is low. MMT would contend that creating money is ill-advised, which it was in early 2021. The GDP growth was exceptionally high in the fourth quarter of 2020 and throughout 2021. Unemployment was also dropping from the highs of 2020 and stood around 5%. So the timing of injecting the two spending bills with the $3 trillion of spending into a strong economy with low employment wasn't in line with MMT's theory. So the result was predictable, the highest inflation rate that we've seen in 40 years. But it wasn't the fault of modern monetary theory. In fact, it was an exact opposition. So when we understand that, and when you see, for example, go back to the big spending bills of 2020, right? Just a year before this, we had the CARES Act and several other acts that injected about $3 trillion into the economy. And what happened? Did we have high inflation? No, we didn't. Why? Because the GDP had actually declined 13.8%. I think that's the highest decline in history. I mean, that's huge for a nation to lose that much in their gross domestic product. And unemployment was double digits. Some say it was 15%, some say it was 20%. So injecting trillions of dollars into an economy like that, creating money then, is really, really helpful. Probably helped us avoid a major depression. So that's why spending $3 trillion one year and then coming back a year later and spending another $3 trillion when the economy was cooking and when the unemployment was low was not ill-advised. So when you see spending bills being passed, it doesn't mean there's going to be hyperinflation. Take Japan between 1995 and 2020, 25 years. And Japan fought deflation while creating a lot of money, a lot of spending. In fact, they were trying to get inflation to take hold because deflation can actually be far more damaging than inflation. And even though they were creating and printing a lot of money, inflation just didn't happen. So I used to mistakenly believe that anytime you created money, you could have inflation. Back in 2008, when we had a $1 trillion spending bill, I was super concerned, super anxious that we were going to see hyperinflation. Well, did I say in 2028? In 2008, that $1 trillion package probably saved us from a major depression, and we did not have inflation. So this is the message that I want to send in an emotional context, that we can have money scripts that say printing money is inflationary. Creating money will result in hyperinflation. Creating money by governments is bad. Creating money means that we have to pay back that debt and we can go bankrupt. That is not true. Creating money does not mean any of that. And the U.S. government will always be able to pay its debts in dollars. So I'm often asked by clients, Rick, do you think Social Security will even be around for me? It's going to go bankrupt by 2034. Well, again, it's true. Technically, the fund that has the money is going to run out of money in 2034. And that means Social Security has to rely directly on infusions from taxes or creating dollars. And we're just not given this information by politicians, by the government, mostly because they don't understand it themselves. How can that be? How can we be electing people to Congress that don't understand basic monetary theory, economics? Or heck, we elect people to Congress that are amazing liars who have fudged their resumes, much less understand the technicalities of economic policy. So So it is believable, right, that this happens. And that's why I want to bring some calm to you and your system around the fact that there's money scripts that parts of us have believed, that we hold to, that we think are absolute truth, that many times are not. They certainly are true if you live in Germany and you use the euro. You could go bankrupt as a nation. You've got to figure out how to pay off those euro debts, but not if you live in the United States of America or in the UK or a country that prints its own currency. So understanding this is going to put you way ahead of most of your peers, most all politicians. I had a chance to present this once to a member of Congress, and after about an hour, he told me it was the most interesting hour he had spent in the last 3 weeks. Now, I don't know to this day that he completely grasps MMT, because MMT was originally floated by those who wanted to use created dollars for what would be considered more liberal causes like full unemployment and expanding social programs. So MMT can often be linked to more far left causes. MMT itself isn't right and it isn't left. It's right in the middle. And the reason it's in the middle is because when you understand MMT, just the basic theory, the political part of this is how you spend the created money. For example, if more right-wing folks had brought MMT forth, they would arguably be wanting to use the money for more defense spending, or cutting taxes and using the spending to run basic government programs and things of this type. So the MMT in itself, and it took me going through a book study with the author to finally get this, that MMT is apolitical. It's how you spend the created dollars that becomes political. So I know this is a lot of technical stuff, and it's financial therapy. And part of financial therapy is helping us look at the emotional side of what we believe, helping us look at our money scripts, helping us build flexibility around what we think is true. And so I hope that this can just relieve a little bit of anxiety the next time you hear somebody say that the U.S. can go bankrupt and that we're kicking the can down the road. And a lot of anxiety can start bubbling up. We can't go bankrupt. Social Security is going to be there. And as long as we are smart with creating the money and we create it at appropriate times, then we won't pay the huge price of inflation. We are paying that price of inflation today. And the Federal Reserve is fighting it by raising raising interest rates. This is what happens. To fight inflation, you raise rates, and you can also raise taxes. And then doing so, you can cause a recession. So it's not without consequences, right? It's timing. It's all in doing the right thing at the right time. So if you want to learn more about this, Stephanie Kelton is a professor of economics and public policy at Stony Brook University, and she's the author of a book called The Deficit Myth. She also has an interview on NPR's Marketplace that you might want to Google. That is good. I mean, you can listen to a number of things she's done on YouTube, and she's probably the one of the leading world experts on modern monetary theory. But as she said in that particular interview, she says there's limits to production and supply. If spending is excessive, there's going to be inflation. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope it hasn't been too dry, too technical. But like I said, I've had so many clients really relax around government spending when they understood this very simple idea that federal governments can print money. They're the only ones that can print money, so they cannot go bankrupt. But they sure can cause inflation if they create that money at the wrong time. All right. Thanks so much for listening today. Please continue to drop me a line for topics that you'd find interesting or any questions you have. rick@rickkahler.com. All right. Take care. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.